Welcome to Rod Talks Radio, where we're talking about how your brain syncs with the earth. Let's get right into it with this beautiful podcast.
So, have you ever been sitting at your desk, perfectly fine 1 minute, and then suddenly, for absolutely no logical reason, your body just starts humming with this unexplainable low-level anxiety?
Oh, yeah. I mean, all the time.
Right. Or maybe you get this really sudden, high-pitched ringing in your ears, like a tiny, localized alarm bell just going off. And then, well, on the completely opposite end of the spectrum, have you ever walked outside, stood under a cloudy sky, and felt this massive wave of profound, mysterious peace wash over you that you just can't articulate?
Yeah, and the funny thing is most people just brush those moments off immediately. I mean, we have this really deep-seated need to find localized, visible causes for how we feel.
We really do.
So, if you feel that sudden anxiety, you immediately blame the extra cup of coffee you had at breakfast. Or if you feel a wave of peace, you just assume it's because it's Friday afternoon. We treat our bodies like these isolated machines that only react to what we consciously put into them.
But what if that isolation is just a total illusion? Like, what if those sudden shifts in your mood or your focus or even, the physical pain in your joints aren't just personal psychological failings or random biology?
Right. What if they're not random at all?
Exactly. What if you are experiencing a literal physical response to the electromagnetic heartbeat of the Earth? Welcome to this deep dive on the Rod Talks podcast, and I want to give a massive special thanks to Rod Lyman of the Reiki Academy for hosting this conversation.
Yes, thank you so much for having us. It's a fascinating topic.
It really is. Today we're taking a massive stack of incredibly diverse sources and venturing into some truly mind-bending territory. We want to understand the invisible architecture of sound, frequency, and energy.
And the materials we're synthesizing for this deep dive, they represent this really fascinating collision of disciplines. On one hand, we're looking at NASA-supported physiology investigations into magnetically shielded environments, along with really rigorous quantitative EEG studies mapping human brainwaves.
Which is heavy, hard science.
Very heavy. But on the other hand, we're also analyzing historical texts on ancient harmonic mathematics, sleep technology data from companies like Aura, and even these really deep dive philosophical threads mapping the actual mechanics of energy work.
So our mission for this deep dive is to basically stitch all of these seemingly disparate fields together. We really want to decode the mechanical difference between, say, a brainwave and a musical pitch. Or, to use the terms from our sources, the difference between hertz as a quantitative measurement and tone as a qualitative spiritual voice.
That distinction is so critical to everything we're going to talk about.
Yeah, it's the whole foundation. We're going to explore how the Earth itself acts as a gigantic natural resonant cavity. And most importantly, we're going to uncover the science suggesting that the human body functions as a literal, highly sensitive antenna.
Right, an antenna that picks up on both that quantitative hertz and that qualitative tone.
Exactly. We're going to connect the dots between global lightning storms, ancient Gregorian chants, and the firing of neurons in your own brain. And you, listening to this right now, you are right at the center of this web.
Well, to build that bridge properly, we really have to start with the foundational physics of sound and vibration. I mean, before we even get to brainwaves or the Earth's magnetic field, we need to understand what a frequency actually is in the physical world.
Let's unpack that.
Fundamentally, what we perceive as sound travels as an acoustic wave through an elastic medium.
An elastic medium, meaning like something it can push against.
Exactly. That medium could be a solid, a liquid, or a gas, like the air that's currently between you, the listener, and your speakers.
Let's visualize that, because I think it's really easy to just think of sound as this invisible magic beam.
Yeah.
But it's highly physical. When I speak, my vocal cords vibrate, and they literally push the air molecules sitting right in front of them.
Right, and then those molecules bump into the next set of molecules and so on.
Yeah, it creates this chain reaction of high and low pressure. It's a literal mechanical displacement of particles. And human evolution has calibrated our ears to pick up on a very specific sliver of those mechanical chain reactions.
Right, the human hearing range.
Yes. Specifically, vibrations that happen between roughly 20 times a second and 20,000 times a second. So that's 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz.
And just for context, anything vibrating slower than 20 hertz is what we call infrasound. We might feel it as a rumble in our chest, like an earthquake or a massive subwoofer at a concert, but we don't actually hear it as a distinct tone.
Right. And anything faster than 20,000 hertz is ultrasound.
Exactly. That's the realm of dog whistles and bat echolocation.
Yeah.
But the sources point out something incredibly crucial here. The human body isn't just a pair of ears attached to a meat sack.
I love that phrasing. We are a holistic bioelectrical system.
We really are. Every single cell in your body, because of its physical structure and its high water content, actually acts as a sound resonator.
The tuning fork analogy from the sources illustrates this so beautifully. If you have two tuning forks, right, and they are both calibrated perfectly to the exact same note, let's say C, you set them up on a table just a few inches apart.
Right.
You strike the first one, it vibrates, it pushes the air molecules, creating that acoustic wave. But if you watch the second tuning fork closely, even though literally no one has touched it, it will begin to vibrate and hum all on its own.
Yeah, that phenomenon is called sympathetic vibration. The second fork basically receives the kinetic energy from the air molecules. And because it shares the exact same fundamental resonant frequency as the first fork, it absorbs that energy super efficiently.
It's built to speak the same mathematical language.
Exactly. And when we scale that concept up to the human body, we begin to realize that we are constantly interacting with the rhythmic vibrations of our environment. We're constantly in a state of sympathetic vibration with the world around us.
Even if those vibrations are completely silent to our conscious hearing. Which brings us to the control center of this entire bioelectrical system, which is the human brain. The brain operates on very specific frequencies, and I love the analogy from the sources of treating the brain like a radio dial.
Oh, it's a great analogy.
You are constantly tuning in to different stations, different frequencies, depending on what state of consciousness you need to be in at that moment. So, if we look at the EEG data from our stack of research, we can actually map this dial out.
Let's go through it. At the absolute bottom of the dial, you have delta waves. These oscillate super slowly, between 0.5 and 4 hertz. This is your deepest, dreamless sleep.
Right, so your heart rate slows way down, your breathing is rhythmic, and this is really where the body does its heavy lifting for physical healing and immune system regulation.
Yeah. Then dialing it up slightly, we enter the theta wave band, which operates between 4 and 8 hertz. And this is a really fascinating transitional state.
Because it's the realm of REM sleep and dreaming, right?
It is, but it's also the state of deep meditation. It's that twilight zone you enter just before you fall asleep, or just as you're waking up in the morning. The sources describe theta as a highly creative, intuitive state where the brain is pretty much disconnected from the external sensory world.
It's focused entirely on internal imagery and subconscious processing. Okay, so then you turn the dial a bit further to alpha, which sits between roughly 8 and 13 hertz.
Right, so here you're awake, but you're completely relaxed.
You aren't actively solving a math problem, you're just kind of daydreaming. It's the baseline state of calm. I know a lot of athletes and musicians refer to this as the flow state.
Yeah, that effortless focus. Then comes beta, from 13 to 30 hertz. This is where most of us spend our workdays. It's normal waking consciousness. You're focused, analytical, paying attention to the outside world.
And depending on how high into the beta range you go, you might be experiencing stress or anxiety.
Right. Oh, absolutely. High beta is very stressful. And finally, at the highest end of the standard dial, we have gamma waves. These operate anywhere from 30 up to 50 hertz and sometimes even higher.
And gamma waves are incredibly interesting to me because they aren't just about localized focus. They're associated with highly complex cognitive processing and sudden, sweeping insights.
Yeah, they occur when really disparate areas of the brain synthesize information simultaneously. Some neuroscientific literature even associates intense bursts of gamma activity with transcendent or mystical experiences.
Okay, let me pause you right there, though, because this raises a pretty glaring mechanical question that we really have to address. We just established that human hearing, like our ability to detect physical acoustic waves, stops at a minimum of 20 hertz.
Right.
But these brainwave states we're talking about, like the deep restorative theta state, they're operating way down at 4 to 8 hertz. If our brains are relying on these extremely low frequencies to function, but our ears physically cannot hear them, how do we actually interact with them?
That's the big question.
Right. How do we absorb a 7 hertz signal if it's biologically silent to us?
Well, that distinction requires us to separate acoustic waves from electromagnetic fields. An acoustic sound wave requires a physical medium. It needs air or water to push particles around. But your brainwaves, they are not making an acoustic sound.
Oh, right. Your neurons aren't literally vibrating back and forth to push brain fluid around.
Exactly. They are generating electromagnetic pulses, they're firing electrical charges, and those charges create an electromagnetic field that radiates outward, entirely independent of air pressure.
And this is the bridge. This totally explains how we interact with the most powerful electromagnetic field in our immediate environment, which is the Earth itself.
The Earth's heartbeat.
Yes. This is where the physics gets incredibly cinematic. Let's talk about Winfried Otto Schumann, the German physicist who, in 1952, predicted the existence of a standing electromagnetic wave inside the Earth's atmosphere.
Right, so Schumann was essentially trying to calculate the resonance of the space between the surface of the Earth and the ionosphere.
And the ionosphere is that highly charged layer of the upper atmosphere, starting about, 80 kilometers above our heads?
Yeah, about 80 kilometers.
Yeah.
And because it's constantly being bombarded by solar winds and ultraviolet radiation from the sun, the atoms up there are literally stripped of their electrons. This creates a really dense layer of positive ions.
So we have the surface of the Earth, which carries a negative charge, and the ionosphere 80 kilometers up, which carries a positive charge. The space in between those two layers basically forms a gigantic spherical cavity.
And from an electrical engineering perspective, that spherical cavity functions as an enormous capacitor. The mathematics detailed in our sources are just staggering.
They really are. The total charge residing in this atmospheric space is roughly 500,000 coulombs, with a constant voltage potential of 200,000 volts.
But here's the thing. A resonant cavity, much like a guitar string or a tuning fork, it doesn't vibrate on its own. It needs a driver. It needs something to strike it, to ring it like a bell.
Right.
And in the case of the Earth, that driver is global lightning.
Which is so crazy to think about. At any given moment, 24 hours a day, there are roughly 1,000 lightning storms happening somewhere on the planet.
Yeah, that translates to about 100 individual lightning strikes every single second.
Every second. And every single one of those lightning flashes acts as this intense electromagnetic pulse.
Right, and while much of the high-frequency energy from that lightning just dissipates locally, the extremely low-frequency waves behave totally differently.
Okay.
Because their wavelengths are so incredibly long, literally thousands of kilometers, they don't just dissipate.
They wrap completely around the globe.
Exactly. They bounce between the surface and the ionosphere, trapped inside this spherical cavity. They circle the Earth, they combine, they amplify one another, and they create a continuous global standing wave.
And that standing wave is the Schumann Resonance.
Yes.
And when Schumann and his colleagues actually measured the fundamental frequency of this planetary ringing, the number they found was 7.83 hertz.
7.83 hertz is the fundamental baseline. And because of the physical geometry of the cavity, it also produces a series of harmonics. You can think of those like overtones on musical instruments.
Right, the harmonics. And those occur at roughly 14.1, 20.3, 26.4, 33, 39, and 45 hertz.
All right.
When I was going through the stack of research for this deep dive, putting those specific numbers next to the brainwave dial we discussed earlier gave me massive goosebumps.
Oh, the overlay is incredible.
It is. The electromagnetic frequencies of the Earth map exactly onto the human brainwave states. It's not like a near miss, it is a direct overlay. 7.83 hertz, the fundamental heartbeat of the planet, sits precisely on the boundary line between theta and alpha brainwaves.
Right, that threshold.
Yes. The exact threshold of deep relaxation, internal healing, and the flow state. And then the first overtone, 14.1 hertz, maps perfectly to low beta, which is relaxed, waking focus. 20 hertz is mid beta. And the higher harmonics, up in the 30s and 40s, map flawlessly into gamma.
And the thing is, we don't just have to rely on conceptual similarities here. The sources actually provide hard, quantitative data proving that biological entrainment is actively occurring.
Let's talk about that.
One of the foundational pieces of research we're looking at is a quantitative EEG study conducted by Dr. Michael Persinger and his team.
Mm-hmm.
They basically brought 41 men and women into a laboratory setting to see if the human brain actually interacts with this global standing wave.
They mapped the spectral power densities of the subjects' brains. And let's break down how they did that, because the methodology is what makes this so convincing to me. They didn't just ask people how they felt on a survey.
No, not at all. They attached highly sensitive EEG sensors to the subjects to continuously monitor the electromagnetic fields generated by their brains. At the exact same time, they were using specialized magnetometers to measure the real-time fluctuations in the Schumann resonance outside the laboratory.
They were actively looking for moments where the two separate data streams synchronized.
Exactly. And they found repeated, real-time coherence between the human brains and the first three modes of the Earth's resonance, specifically in the 7 to 8 hertz, 13 to 14 hertz, and 19 to 20 hertz bands.
They literally caught the human brain syncing up with the Earth's magnetic field on a monitor. That is wild.
They observed that for about 300 milliseconds at a time, roughly twice a minute, the subject's brains would lock in and totally synchronize with the planet.
Twice a minute.
Yeah. And the study went even further. It pinpointed the exact anatomical location where this maximum coherence was occurring. It was happening primarily within the right caudal hemisphere, near a structure called the perihippocampal gyrus.
The perihippocampal gyrus,
Yeah.
which is the part of the brain responsible for memory encoding and spatial navigation.
Yes, it tells us where we are in our physical environment and helps us catalog our experiences.
The implication there is just profound. During this 300 millisecond lock-in, the specific quantities of electromagnetic energy in the environment are sufficient enough to allow a significant interaction of information with the brain.
Right, the physical boundary between the individual's mind and the external environment effectively disappears. For a fraction of a second, the human brain and the Earth become one continuous, synchronized bioelectrical system.
So if we are biologically hardwired to sync with this 7.83 hertz pulse, if our very ability to consolidate memories and navigate our physical space relies on checking in with this Earth metronome twice a minute, what happens when that metronome is taken away?
That is the big question.
Or perhaps more relevant to our daily lives, what happens when the metronome gets violently loud and chaotic?
Well, to answer what happens when the signal disappears entirely, we actually have to look to space exploration. Because the Schumann resonance is a global phenomenon, it's incredibly difficult to study its absence. You can't just flip a switch and turn the Earth's magnetic field off to see how humans react.
Which is obviously a massive problem for NASA. If they're planning to send astronauts on long-term missions to the moon or eventually a multi-year journey to Mars, those astronauts are leaving the ionospheric cavity.
Right. They're stepping completely outside the resonant chamber.
Yeah.
They'll be totally cut off from the 7.83 hertz pulse that their biology literally evolved inside of.
So how did they test that?
To simulate this deprivation on Earth, engineers had to construct an environment of extreme isolation. The sources detail a facility known as the Berlin Magnetically Shielded Room, or the BMSR. It's located at the Federal Metrology Institute of Germany, and it is considered one of the quietest electromagnetic environments on the planet.
I really want to explain the architecture of this room because it highlights just how hard it actually is to hide from the Earth's signal. The BMSR is essentially a giant cube built with 8 distinct layers of shielding.
8 layers.
Yeah. The outermost layer is made of seamless aluminum. The aluminum acts as an eddy current shield, so it effectively blocks out high-frequency electromagnetic interference like your radio waves and cell phone towers. But underneath that, they have 7 separate layers of a highly specialized material called mu metal.
Right, mu metal. It's a specific nickel-iron alloy, and it's known for having an incredibly high magnetic permeability. Instead of simply reflecting magnetic fields, mu metal absorbs and actively redirects magnetic field lines around the perimeter of the room.
It guides the magnetic field away from the interior space.
Exactly. By layering it 7 times, they created walls that are over 1 meter thick. The interior of the BMSR is nearly entirely free of ambient electromagnetic fields, including the Schumann resonance.
So what happens to humans inside it? When researchers place healthy human subjects into these types of profoundly shielded environments for extended periods, the physiological results are incredibly telling.
They really are. Without that 7.83 hertz baseline to entrain to, the subject's internal rhythms become totally chaotic. Their circadian clocks drift completely out of sync, their sleep architecture
They
fragments.
just can't sleep properly.
Right, and they exhibit measurable signs of emotional distress and physical fatigue. And the real kicker is, when researchers artificially introduce a faint synthetic 7.83 hertz pulse back into that shielded room, those chaotic symptoms rapidly stabilize.
Our bodies literally crave the signal. It is an internal biological necessity.
It really is. However, for the vast majority of us who are not astronauts and who aren't living inside a mu metal cube in Berlin, the problem is not a lack of the signal. The problem is that the Earth's magnetic field is highly dynamic.
Yes, and this brings us to a pervasive myth that one of our sources goes out of its way to correct. Because if you spend enough time on alternative health blogs or certain forums, you will inevitably see claims that the Earth's frequency is rising.
Oh, I've seen that everywhere. People claim that the Schumann resonance has jumped from 7.83 hertz to 40 hertz or higher, and they usually attribute this to some kind of spiritual awakening or a planetary ascension.
I see those posts all the time, but the sources are crystal clear on this. That is a fundamental misunderstanding of planetary physics. The Earth's fundamental frequency is not rising.
Right. Remember, that 7.83 hertz number is dictated entirely by the physical dimensions of the spherical cavity between the ground and the ionosphere. Unless the Earth physically shrinks or the ionosphere suddenly drops thousands of miles closer to the surface, the baseline pitch of that cavity will always remain roughly 7.83 hertz.
So what is actually changing then?
What is changing, and sometimes changing violently, is the amplitude, the power, basically the loudness of the signal.
Okay, so the Earth isn't changing its pitch, it's just screaming the exact same note much louder.
Exactly. The power of the resonance spikes due to massive external energy inputs. This can be driven by severe global weather patterns, increasing the volume of lightning strikes, or even tropical temperature anomalies. But the most disruptive factor, by far, is space weather.
Space weather, like solar flares.
Right. When the sun releases solar flares, or coronal mass ejections, those massive bursts of charged particles physically slam into the Earth's magnetic field. This geomagnetic storming batters the ionosphere, altering its density and height, which violently intensifies the resonance trapped beneath it.
And when the Earth's electromagnetic environment starts screaming like that, our sensitive bioelectrical antennas pick up all that chaotic noise. The sources draw a direct line between these spikes in amplitude and the physiological symptoms many people experience during geomagnetic storms.
Yeah, when the background electromagnetic field becomes highly volatile, your autonomic nervous system is essentially thrown into overload.
It forces the body into a sympathetic state, the classic fight-or-flight response.
Which perfectly explains the brain fog.
Right. If your brain naturally relies on syncing up with a stable 7.83 hertz signal to drop into that relaxed alpha-theta state, and suddenly that signal is blasting up 5 times its normal amplitude and fluctuating wildly, your brain struggles to find the beat.
It literally feels out of sync. It feels like you're turning a radio dial, but you're stuck in the static between two stations. You can't focus, and you just feel exhausted.
And the impact goes all the way down to the cellular level. Every single cell in your body maintains a specific voltage potential across its membrane. It uses this voltage to regulate the flow of critical ions like calcium and sodium in and out of the cell.
So when the external electromagnetic environment shifts dramatically, it can subtly disrupt those delicate cellular voltages.
Yeah.
The sources note that this disruption can trigger sudden physical pain. People very often report that old joint injuries start aching during geomagnetic storms.
Because the cellular voltage shifts literally trigger localized inflammation markers. That is fascinating.
And we can't forget the tinnitus. So many people report a high-pitched ringing in their ears during these events. It isn't an acoustic sound in the room, it's the auditory nerve physically reacting to the sudden shift in the ambient electromagnetic environment.
And we absolutely have to mention sleep disruption. The pineal gland, which is the part of the brain responsible for pumping out melatonin to regulate our sleep-wake cycles, is exquisitely sensitive to magnetic fields.
Highly sensitive.
So when the Schumann resonance is chaotic, melatonin production gets suppressed or delayed. The result is sudden insomnia or incredibly vivid, exhausting dreams that leave you feeling like you ran a marathon while you slept.
Right. Recognizing this vulnerability, though, raises a highly practical question. If our biology is at the mercy of space weather and fluctuating planetary rhythms, are we completely helpless? What can you, the listener, actually do when the Earth gets loud?
Well, the sources offer several scientifically backed remedies, and the most immediate one is surprisingly low-tech. It's called grounding or earthing.
And I know the moment you say earthing, a lot of people just roll their eyes and think it's total woo-woo nonsense.
I used to think that too, but the sources explain it purely through the lens of basic electrical physics.
Right. The concept is simply taking off your shoes and socks and standing barefoot on a natural conductive surface, like grass, dirt, or wet sand.
Because the surface of the Earth maintains a constant, massive negative charge. It's essentially an infinite reservoir of free electrons. The human body, on the other hand, as we go about our day in insulated shoes, living in insulated houses, exposed to Wi-Fi and appliances, we build up a positive charge. We accumulate free radicals.
So when you make direct skin-to-earth contact, there is a literal, measurable electron exchange. You are physically grounding your body's bioelectrical circuit to the planet.
And clinical studies on grounding demonstrate that this electron transfer has immediate physiological effects. It rapidly reduces circulating cortisol levels, it lowers systemic inflammation by neutralizing those positively charged free radicals.
And it stabilizes the internal bioelectrical voltage, making the body way more resilient against chaotic external fields.
It is genuinely the easiest way to reset your internal radio dial. But we also have to look at how humans have historically tried to manage their internal frequencies. Not just by connecting to the Earth's baseline rhythm, but by using specific audible tools.
Yes, and this brings us to a major pivot in our deep dive, the fascinating world of the solfeggio frequencies.
Which is where the concepts from the Rod Talks podcast and the Reiki Academy really come into focus for us today.
Absolutely. To navigate the solfeggio scale accurately, we must establish a rigorous distinction between what we've just discussed and what we're about to discuss. One of our sources, a really detailed Reddit thread mapping the philosophy of energy work, features a user who frames this perfectly.
That distinction is vital. It is the core difference between hertz as a quantity and tone as a quality.
Right. The user eloquently points out that the Schumann resonance at 7.83 hertz is a foundational rhythm. It's an internal biological necessity that dictates your overall state of consciousness. It is basically the base of the pyramid.
The solfeggio frequencies, however, are musical pitches. They are specific audible tones vibrating much faster, like 396 hertz or 528 hertz.
Right. You do not want your brain waves oscillating at 528 times a second. That wouldn't be a state of enlightenment. That would be a catastrophic seizure.
Yeah, exactly. You don't use 528 hertz to replace the 7.83 hertz rhythm. Instead, you use these external pitches as directive medicinal tools. You play them externally to trigger localized qualitative responses in the body's tissues and energy centers.
It's the difference between the metronome keeping the beat of a song and a specific piano key being struck to evoke an emotion.
Such a great way to put it. So where did these specific piano keys actually come from?
Well, the history of the solfeggio tones is deeply embedded in ancient sacred music traditions. These specific frequencies serve as the mathematical foundation for 8th century Gregorian chants, most notably the hymn to St. John the Baptist. And some historical analyses in our sources trace the root mathematics even further back to ancient Sanskrit mantras in India.
The modern revival of these tones, though, is largely credited to Dr. Joseph Puglio in 1997. According to the texts, Puglio utilized Pythagorean skepticism and a method of numerological reduction to essentially extract a pattern of numbers from the Book of Numbers in the Old Testament.
He extracted 6 core frequencies, and later, 3 more were extrapolated to complete what we now call the 9-tone solfeggio scale.
And according to energy workers, like the amazing practitioners at the Reiki Academy, each of these frequencies acts as a specific acoustic key. They're purported to unlock and balance targeted energy centers, or chakras, in the body.
Let's walk through the primary frequencies detailed in the scale. Starting at the lower end, we have 174 hertz. This tone is considered the foundation of physical healing.
Right. It's primarily associated with relieving physical pain, particularly in the lower back, legs, and feet. Practitioners describe it as acting like a natural anesthetic.
Yeah, it conveys a vibrational sense of safety and security to the internal organs. Moving up the scale, we find 396 hertz, which targets the root chakra.
And this frequency is utilized for emotional clearing.
Right. Exactly. It's associated with turning grief into joy and actively eliminating fear and guilt, which, from an energetic standpoint, are considered incredibly dense, low-vibrational emotions that actually block biological functioning and create stagnant energy in the body.
Wow. Next is 417 hertz, tied to the sacral chakra. This tone is utilized for clearing destructive influences and facilitating change, specifically targeting the lingering cellular memory of past trauma.
Then we arrive at 432 hertz, which is frequently referred to as the heartbeat of the earth pitch. While it's technically separate from the core solfeggio 6, it is deeply integrated into this entire field of study.
432 hertz is reputed to lower heart rate and blood pressure, basically aligning the listener's biology with the broader harmonic resonance of the natural universe.
And then we hit the crown jewel of the scale, 528 hertz. This is known as the love frequency or the miracle tone.
The miracle tone. It's associated with the solar plexus chakra. It's said to boost self-esteem, ignite creativity, and foster profound inner peace. But, most notably, 528 hertz is heavily promoted all across the internet as possessing the actual ability to repair damaged DNA.
And here is a fascinating bit of trivia from the sources. John Lennon composed and recorded his iconic song Imagine entirely in the key of 528 hertz.
I love that detail. But the historical and cultural narrative, while undeniably rich, it requires us as an analytical deep dive to interrogate the empirical science. We have to ask, is there controlled clinical proof that playing a specific pitch, like 528 hertz, alters human biology in a way that standard music does not?
And surprisingly, the sources actually provide clinical data answering that exact question.
They do. We are looking at a controlled, peer-reviewed study conducted in Japan. It investigated the physiological effects of 528 hertz music compared directly to standard 440 hertz music.
And 440 hertz, just for context, is the international standard tuning for almost all modern commercial music.
Right. So the researchers took a group of healthy participants and had them listen to the exact same piece of music, tuned to the two different frequencies, on separate days. And they continuously measured biomarkers related to the endocrine system and the autonomic nervous system.
The data from that study is incredibly stark. But let's explain how this actually works mechanically. Because how does a sound wave entering your ear literally change your hormones?
It relies entirely on the vagus nerve.
Yes.
When the specific acoustic vibration of 528 hertz enters the ear canal, it vibrates the tympanic membrane. That translates the mechanical wave into electrical signals in the auditory nerve. These signals travel to the brainstem, heavily interacting with the vagus nerve.
And the vagus nerve is the primary superhighway of the parasympathetic nervous system. It descends from the brainstem and branches out to almost every major organ, including the heart and the adrenal glands.
So the tone essentially sends a chemical text message down the vagus nerve directly to the adrenal glands, telling them to change their output.
Exactly. And the Japanese study proved this happens rapidly. After just 5 minutes of exposure to the 528 hertz music, the participants showed a statistically significant decrease in their mean levels of cortisol.
Cortisol being the primary hormone associated with stress and the fight-or-flight response.
Right. Simultaneously, the music triggered an increase in the release of oxytocin, which is the hormone associated with social bonding, trust, and profound relaxation. Furthermore, their subjective tension and anxiety scores just plummeted.
And the control group data is equally important here. When the participants listened to the exact same music tuned to standard 440 hertz, there was no significant change in any of those salivary biomarkers.
None at all. The study concluded definitively that the 528 hertz frequency, specifically, exerted a strong, measurable, stress-reducing effect on the physiological systems.
That is just incredible. 5 minutes of listening to a specific pitch literally rewires your hormone profile. But everything we've talked about so far involves passive listening.
Yeah.
You put on headphones and you just let the sound wash over you.
Yeah.
What happens when humans take an active role? What happens when we generate these specific resonant frequencies ourselves using our own vocal cords?
This inquiry brings us to a profound intersection where neurophysiology, microbiology, and quantum biophysics all meet. We are relying heavily here on the research conducted by Dr. Marco Ruggiero.
Yes, who rigorously investigated the biological and environmental impacts of chanting. Specifically, the Buddhist practice of chanting the phrase Nam Myoho Renge Kyo.
Let's start with the brain. When someone engages in repetitive chanting, what is mechanically happening inside their skull?
Well, our sources, which include a comprehensive review of chanting and mental well-being, explain that the act of chanting drastically alters the landscape of brainwave activity. The primary mechanism is the reduction of mind wandering.
Right. And to understand this, we really have to look at the default mode network, or DMN.
I can actually explain the DMN because understanding it fundamentally changed how I view my own anxiety. The default mode network is a series of interconnected brain regions that become highly active when you are not focused on the outside world.
It's what turns on when you're sitting in traffic or waiting in line or lying in bed unable to sleep.
Exactly. The DMN is responsible for self-monitoring, analyzing the past, and worrying about the future. It is basically the neurological engine of overthinking, and it relies heavily on chaotic, low-frequency delta and theta power.
Right. The DMN is essential for self-reflection, obviously, but when it becomes overactive, it leads directly to rumination and depression. The act of rhythmic vocalization chanting basically acts as a manual override switch for the default mode network.
It just shuts it down.
Pretty much. The cognitive demand of maintaining the rhythm, combined with the physical vibration in the vagus nerve caused by the vocal cords, forces the brain to shift away from the DMN. Chaotic delta power decreases, and highly focused alpha band power increases.
You transition from a state of internal disorganized anxiety to a state of relaxed, laser-focused attention. That makes perfect sense neurologically. You give the brain a repetitive task, and it quiets down.
But the Ruggiero studies didn't just hook the chanters up to EEG machines, they looked at the environment surrounding the chanter. And this is where the science literally feels like magic.
It really does.
The first environmental finding was microbiological. Ruggiero placed petri dishes containing live probiotic cultures, specifically yeast and bacteria, in the immediate vicinity of individuals chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo.
And the chanting altered the bacteria's metabolism.
It did. The specific acoustic frequencies produced by the human voice reciting this exact mantra physically interacted with the cellular membranes of the bacteria sitting in a dish across the room, increasing their metabolic activity.
The acoustic sound was acting as a biological catalyst for an entirely different species.
That is wild. It's a stunning demonstration that the acoustic vibrations we generate have direct, measurable impacts on living matter outside of our own bodies. But the biophysical impacts documented in the sources extend even further, crossing the boundary into quantum biology.
Specifically regarding the phenomenon of ultra-weak photon emission.
Right. Let's slow down and explain that.
Ultra-weak photon emission, or biophotons. It's the concept that living cells actually emit light. We literally glow in the dark, just incredibly faintly.
Yes. All living biological systems emit a very faint, steady stream of photons. It's a natural byproduct of cellular metabolism. Well, a fascinating study by a researcher named Van Wyk investigated how the active meditation and chanting affects this photon emission.
They placed subjects in completely dark, light-tight rooms and used highly sensitive photomultiplier tubes to measure the light particles emitting from the subjects' hands and foreheads before, during, and after meditation.
And the chanting literally changed the structure of the light.
That's insane.
It significantly altered the statistical distribution of the light emission. Before the meditation began, the biophotons were emitted in what is mathematically described as a fractal pattern. This indicates a highly complex, long-range correlated structure.
Which biological physicists associate with a high level of oxidative stress and chaotic metabolic chatter within the cells. Okay, how do we picture that? A fractal pattern of light emission.
It's like a crowd of people in a stadium, all talking over each other at different volumes. It's noisy, it's clustered, it's stressed.
That's a really helpful analogy. But after the period of deep meditation and chanting, the photomultipliers registered a profound shift. The emission pattern changed from that chaotic fractal structure to a much more random, Poisson-like distribution.
Right. Let's quickly explain a Poisson distribution. It basically means the events occur completely independently of one another at a constant average rate.
Think of raindrops hitting a tin roof during a very steady, calm shower. The drops are random, but the overall rate is perfectly smooth and even, as opposed to someone wildly throwing buckets of water at the roof in bursts.
Precisely. The mental focus and acoustic vibration of the chant quieted the chaotic metabolic chatter of the subject's biology, which physically changed the statistical pattern of the light particles radiating out from their skin. The chanting fundamentally altered cellular entropy.
Whoa.
But perhaps the most mind-bending claim from Ruggiero's observational research involves what happened to the local background radiation in the room.
Oh, man. I have to admit, this part of the source material had me rereading the text like 3 times. We really have to approach it carefully.
We do. The study continuously monitored the local natural radioactivity in the environment using a highly sensitive radiation detector measuring events in counts per second, or CPS. They were tracking the normal background radioactive decay of the environment.
And the researchers reported a correlation between the periods of deep chanting and subtle anomalous variations in the detected radiation events. Specifically, they claimed that the chanting periods were associated with a higher total integrative count and increased variability in the CPS fluctuations compared to the silent control periods.
We have to pause and realize what this implies. We are talking about fundamental, random physical processes. Radioactive decay is the textbook definition of quantum randomness. It cannot be altered by temperature, pressure, or chemical reactions.
Are the researchers genuinely suggesting that a focused human mind, generating these specific sound frequencies, can influence the rate of radioactive decay?
Well, the source material is careful to contextualize this finding. It explicitly notes the limitations of the observational study and acknowledges that this totally challenges the current paradigms of physics.
Right.
However, it aligns these anomalous findings conceptually with broader, multi-decade research initiatives,
Right.
like the Peer Laboratory, the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Program, and the Global Consciousness Project.
Oh, right. The Peer study spent years having participants try to influence random number generators using just their focused intention, and they found tiny but statistically significant deviations from randomness.
Exactly. The underlying thesis being that Human consciousness, when highly focused or deeply entrained by specific practices like chanting, might actually interact with the inherent quantum randomness of physical reality.
It suggests a framework where the effects of deep meditative practice do not end at the edge of the skull. The energy generated manifests in altered brain states, shifted hormonal profiles, reorganized biophoton emission patterns, and potentially subtle interactions with the fundamental physical processes of the environment itself.
The boundary between the internal biological state and the external physical reality is not a solid wall. It is a highly porous membrane.
Okay, so it is abundantly clear from all this research that these specific frequencies, whether it's the 7.83 hertz foundational pulse of the earth or the 528 hertz solfeggio pitch used for healing, possess profound measurable power.
You do.
But what if the entire modern alternative health community has been calculating the solfeggio frequencies entirely wrong?
This is where we must introduce a highly contrarian, deeply fascinating source from our stack. The mathematical theory of the 11th power solfeggio, which details what the author calls the speed-corrected solfeggio scale.
Let's really unpack the logic here, because it's a brilliant historical critique. The argument hinges entirely on our definition of time. When Dr. Puleo extracted these numbers, 396, 417, 528 from the Old Testament, he interpreted them as modern frequencies.
He assigned them the unit of hertz, which means vibrations per second. 528 vibrations in one single second.
However, the author of the speed-corrected theory points out a massive historical and logical discrepancy. The Old Testament texts were written thousands of years before the invention of the second as a standardized unit of time.
Right. The ancient civilizations that supposedly encoded these sacred numbers did not measure time in seconds, minutes, or hours as we do today.
Exactly. If you are uncovering ancient mathematical secrets, you have to use ancient math. The standard measure of time in that era, according to the source, was the helek.
Yes, the helek. According to historical Hebrew timekeeping, an hour is divided into 1080 helekim. This breaks down to exactly 18 helekim per minute. If you do the math, each single helek lasts exactly 3.333 seconds.
And the source notes that a helek was not just some arbitrary division. It represents the exact amount of time it takes for the Earth to rotate 172nd of a degree on its axis.
Wow.
Yeah, it was considered a proper, astronomically aligned moment, long enough for a human to hold a complete thought.
So the author argues that if Dr. Puleo's ancient numerical sequence of 528 was meant to be applied to the ancient measure of time, calculating it in modern seconds fundamentally warps the result.
If the sacred instruction was actually to play 528 vibrations per helek, and a helek is 3.333 seconds long, the speed of the playback is 3.333 times slower than modern hertz.
The calculation is straightforward. You take the modern 528 hertz frequency and divide it by 3.333. The resulting speed-corrected frequency becomes 158.4 hertz.
I just love this analogy. It's exactly like taking an old 78 RPM vinyl record and accidentally playing it at 3313 RPM.
Right.
If you play it at the wrong speed, you will still hear noise. You might even hear a recognizable song. But the sacred geometry of the sound, the intended harmonic structure, the spaces between the notes, the true resonance changes completely.
And this speed-corrected calculation of 158.4 hertz is not just some arbitrary lower pitch. The source reveals a series of astounding mathematical coincidences that arise only when you use the helek-based frequencies.
This is the part that completely blew my mind. What happens when you analyze the number 158.4?
First, from an astronomical perspective, 158.4 hertz is a precise 11th harmonic of the fundamental frequency of the Earth's 24-hour spin.
Wait, really?
Yeah, if you calculate the incredibly slow frequency of the Earth turning on its axis once a day and scale it up mathematically by powers of 11, you hit 158.4 hertz perfectly. The tone mathematically locks into the macro rotation of the entire planet.
It's tethered to the physical spin of the globe. And what's the second coincidence?
Furthermore, the number 158.4 corresponds flawlessly to the physical dimensions of the planet. The equatorial diameter of the Earth is widely accepted to be roughly 7,920 miles. If you double that diameter, you get exactly 15,840 miles.
No way.
Yes. The numerical signature of the speed-corrected 528 frequency, the digits 1584, is literally written into the physical geometry of the Earth. The source argues that this proves 158.4 is the true Earth-aligned frequency, far more so than the modern 528 hertz.
Now, whether you personally subscribe to the traditional 528 hertz calculation that the Japanese study validated, Or you lean toward the mathematically elegant, speed-corrected 158.4 Hz theory. Both of these approaches point toward a singular, deep human desire. We want to use specific external pitches to harmonize our internal biology.
But this leaves us with a massive practical engineering problem.
Which is how to bridge the gap.
Yes. How do we connect the huge difference between the two things we've discussed today? We have the foundational internal 7.83 Hz Schumann Resonance, which dictates our brain state but is completely silent to our ears.
And then we have these higher solfeggio frequencies, 158.4, 432, 528, which we can hear and use to trigger hormonal changes, but which operate far above our natural brainwave states. How do you merge the two?
Well, to bridge the massive numerical gap between a 7 Hz rhythm and a 500 Hz pitch, we have to look at how modern acoustic technology manipulates the brain. Specifically, we need to understand the mechanics of binaural beats.
And this technology relies on the concept of harmonic octaves, right? Which posits that low frequencies stabilize the physical base, while high frequencies resonate with the complex cognitive and energetic centers.
Exactly. You see binaural beats marketed everywhere now on Spotify, YouTube, meditation apps, usually promising to help you sleep, study, or achieve astral projection. But how do they actually work inside the skull?
That's what I want to know.
Binaural beats exploit a highly specific quirk in human auditory processing. In the natural world, if a sound occurs, like a branch snapping, the acoustic wave hits both of your ears at roughly the same frequency, just at slightly different times and volumes depending on where the sound came from. This helps you locate the source.
But if you put on stereo headphones, you can isolate the ears entirely.
Right, you can feed completely different data into the left and right auditory canals. If you use headphones to play a single steady flat tone into the left ear, let's say 400 Hz, and a slightly different flat tone into the right ear, let's say 410 Hz, the brain receives two conflicting pieces of frequency data. The auditory cortex struggles to process this unnatural discrepancy. It cannot localize the sound.
So to resolve the conflict, the brain hallucinates. It synthesizes an auditory illusion. It creates a third, phantom tone inside the head, which is the exact mathematical difference between the two external frequencies. If the left ear hears 400 and the right ear hears 410, the brain creates a pulsing beat of exactly 10 Hz.
And because 10 Hz is in the alpha brainwave range, the electrical activity of the brain will naturally begin to entrain to that 10 Hz pulse, relaxing the listener.
Let's tie this back to our specific numbers using one of the therapeutic devices mentioned in the sources, the time-waver MED system.
The time-waver MED is categorized in the literature as an information field medicine system, deeply influenced by the complex quantum physics theories of Burkhard Heim. The device is designed to restore balance in a patient's biological information field by transferring new, organizing vibration patterns.
And it uses the binaural beat mechanic to make the silent 7.83 Hz Earth rhythm audible and therapeutically active.
Correct. The system doesn't just play low-frequency static to try and force 7.83 Hz into the body. It utilizes a fundamental audible carrier frequency from the higher octaves. For example, it might use the 432 Hz heartbeat of the Earth pitch as the base. Through the headphones, the system plays exactly 432.00 Hz into the left ear.
And what does it play into the right ear?
Into the right ear, it plays a tone of exactly 439.83 Hz.
Oh, the math is brilliant. 439.83 minus 432 equals exactly 7.83.
Precisely. The auditory cortex processes the two high audible pitches, and in its attempt to resolve the discrepancy, it is forced to internally generate the 7.83 Hz frequency. The brain literally hears the Earth's foundational pulse from the inside out.
This technology perfectly bridges the huge difference. The listener gets the localized biochemical benefits of the 432 Hz pitch, which the clinical studies suggest lowers blood pressure and heart rate, while simultaneously, through the auditory illusion, forcing their brainwaves to entrain to the 7.83 Hz rhythm.
It pulls them down into that regenerative, earth-synced alpha-theta state without them having to sit in the cave.
And this is where things like AD audio and bilateral sound come in, right? Tapping into the golden ratio and sacred geometry to help the brain process this massive scale.
Exactly. It is a sophisticated method of utilizing external sound to forcibly stabilize the internal bioelectrical environment, directly countering the chaotic amplitudes and space weather we discussed earlier. And this concept of utilizing multiple frequencies simultaneously is central to the practical energy work being done at places like the Reiki Academy.
Yes, let's talk about how a practitioner actually applies all this data, because they aren't just hooking people up to headphones, they are working with the energy directly.
According to the frameworks we've reviewed, Practitioners utilize a technique called anatomical visualization. They don't just conceptualize these frequencies as abstract math, they visualize them moving through the client. When a practitioner sits or stands at the head of a client, they are positioning themselves at the crown, the energetic entry point.
Okay.
From this vantage point, they are trained to visualize these different hertz levels, the low, stabilizing Schumann rhythms and the high, activating solfeggio tones, as specific currents of light and color flowing down through the body's meridians.
By holding that focused visualization, the practitioner acts as a resonant anchor. They are using their own stabilized bioelectrical field to entrain the client's chaotic field, helping the client's body bridge the gap between the physical density of the low frequencies and the etheric emotional clearing of the high frequencies.
So let's step back and look at the massive journey we've taken today. We started by dismantling the idea that the human body is just a closed mechanical loop. We've established, through physics and clinical data, that you are a highly sensitive bioelectrical antenna.
You exist constantly within a complex, interwoven matrix of oscillating fields. From the 7.83 hertz lightning-powered pulse of the spherical Earth cavity that guides your deep sleep and memory consolidation,
To the 528 hertz musical tones that can communicate with your vagus nerve to drop your cortisol levels in just 5 minutes.
to the ancient vocal chants that might possess the capacity to literally alter the metabolism of microbial life and the structure of light particles in the space around you, it is all connected by the invisible architecture of vibration. The huge difference in the numbers from 7 to 528 isn't a contradiction. It is a perfect, harmonic, musical scale of human existence.
Which is why it is so critical for you, the listener, to pay profound attention to your physical environment. When you feel sudden brain fog, unexplainable anxiety, or a deep exhaustion that sleep simply cannot cure, it might not be a personal failing. It is highly likely that there's nothing wrong with your psychology or your diet.
It might just be space weather. You might just be dealing with a violent spike in the Schumann Resonance amplitude caused by a solar flare millions of miles away. Your antenna is just picking up static.
And in those overwhelming moments, remember that the simple physical act of taking off your shoes and standing barefoot on the grass earthing is a clinically backed, biophysical way to dump excess electrical charge, reduce your systemic inflammation, and physically tune your biological radio dial back to the baseline rhythm of the planet.
It is entirely about finding resonance. So, as we wrap up this massive exploration, I want to leave you with a final, mind-expanding thought to chew on. We started this deep dive by talking about the murky, often frustrating diagnostic landscape of the human body. But based on the rigorous science and the profound theories we've uncovered today, if your brain physically synchronizes with the electromagnetic heartbeat of the Earth twice a minute, blending your energy with the ionosphere, and if the literal sounds you make can alter the metabolism of cells and the behavior of photons in the space around you, where does the Earth's environment actually end and where do you begin? Think about that porous boundary the next time you put on your headphones to listen to a binaural beat, or the next time you step barefoot onto the damp grass. We want to extend our deepest gratitude to Rod Lyman and the Reiki Academy for leading the conversation and hosting this incredible deep dive on the Rod Talks podcast. Keep your dial tuned, and we'll catch you next time.